Now for the standouts of the 70s. In 1971, we got the Andromeda Strain, the most boring hard science fiction movie I know of. They tried to make it as realistic as possible, and the result was over 2 hours of glacial pacing. The concept is great and the tone is serious, but holy shit, can you afford to waste so much time? Then there is the original Dirty Harry, which is one of the most famous 70s rule of cool titles, but for me it's just a guy with a big gun shooting at people who can't aim straight. It's very basic and lacks the high-octane action of 80s flicks. From recommended movies there is, and now for something completely different, as yet another absurd Monty Python movie, then there is the Omega Man, the superior version of I Am Legend. It does a good job at showing the psychological pressure of living alone, being responsible for the end of the world, and having stress by also being the possible savior of whatever is left. Having mutants instead of zombies is a lot more interesting, since they can talk and think on their own, and the ending feels a lot more satisfying as a whole. And the must-watch movie of the year is The Clockwork Orange, for showing anarchy as means of rebellion against an oppressive government that likes to mess with your mind. From TV series, Columbo began airing, the only murder mystery series where you know the guilty guy right from the start, and you just watch the detective trying to expose him. It is also the year when Kamen Rider began airing, a tokusatsu franchise that still continues to this day, and which hasn't been taken over by the woke left, but it's definitely far more family-friendly compared to the thriller way it used to be. Finally, in anime, this is the year Looping the Third began airing, an action-adventure that used to be super popular for a couple of decades, and then became just another anime nobody is watching anymore, because the colors weren't so pretty anymore. 1972 had Slaughterhouse-5, which is famous as a mindfuck book, but the adaptation is super cheap and doesn't have the constant drama and existential dread of the source material. Aguirre tries to be a mindfuck about adventurers in the Amazon, but it's dull and uneventful to the most part, so you won't be able to get into it much. Man of La Mancha tries to create a theater version of one of Don Quixote's early adventures, but it doesn't show nearly as much, and its rather interesting themes don't excuse the duration. From recommended movies, there is the original version of Solaris. I'm not very keen on the whole concept of getting what you wish for, but as a whole it's a nice sci-fi title. The must-watch movie is The First Godfather, one of the most iconic mafia flicks of all time, although it's ridiculously long as well and lacks the tension of later mafia movies. In anime, it was the year when the blueprints for transforming robots and the 5-member Sentai teams were established. The copy-pasta went out of control at some point, with most mecha series having the exact same archetypes and becoming hard to tell them apart. In video games, Pong came out. This shit was everywhere. You couldn't find an arcade or a console without it. It's the oldest, most easily recognizable video game, and it's just one square and 2 rectangles. 1973 is all about mid-tier psychological stuff. There is Serpico in case you want to check a rather dull crime flick, the likes of which you can find way better in later years. The rest of them are mindfucks where the directors were tripping balls while making that shit. Osamu Tezuka's Belladonna is a weird period drama that turns into an erotic thriller midway. La Planète Sauvage is essentially what would happen if the Planet of the Apes smoked too much weed. Jesus Christ Superstar is basically a musical made by hippies for criticizing Christianity while obviously being stoned. And The Holy Mountain is a junkie's criticism of the modern way of living and what it means to look for enlightenment in a world that only cares about money and power. Needless to say, all these movies are weird, they are not for casual watching, so although I do recommend them, you have to be in the right mindset to like them. 1974 had a lot of interesting titles, which sadly most have forgotten completely. Everybody knows about the second Godfather, which, although a good mafia movie, it's not as great as the first one, but how many have heard of Sean Connery starring in an absurd post-apocalyptic sci-fi about immortality, the satire of Frankenstein, the psychological musical horror comedy tribute of Victorian-era novels, and Mel Brooks doing his best satire on racism? In anime, the first and most famous of Western book adaptations of period dramas came out, beginning an era where families could sit down and safely watch wholesome slice of nothing happens animated series about slight variations of Oliver Twist. The copypasta was again out of control. This period lasted for about a decade, and then everyone switched to watching cute underage girls getting sexualized in contemporary high schools. Boy, they really improved that formula, didn't they? Also in anime, the first Space Battleship Yamato series came out, which was a must-watch at the time for all the patriots and the military fanatics. Unfortunately, they kept making sequels that rehashed the exact same plot over and over until nobody gave a damn anymore. Finally, The Forever War came out this year, which is easily the best standalone military sci-fi story I know of. It fleshes out the main characters, it escalates constantly, it has the right amount of dramatization, and it has a satisfying conclusion. It easily goes into my favorites and I highly recommend it. 1975 established the formula of death games with Rollerball and Death Race 2000, and the original Jaws gave us the basic ideas on how to do monster movies without being schlocky sci-fi. These three films are very basic today, and you are not missing much if you don't check them out. From movies I do recommend, there is One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest for being about crazy people in a mental institution, and there is also Monty Python's The Holy Grail, one of the best absurd comedies ever made. In TV series, this was the year when Super Sentai began airing and lasted practically non-stop all the way to 2025. Then it got some weird reboot. Most of the seasons are very passable, with some of them being far more memorable for their spectacle, music, and most importantly, the villains. The villains have the spotlight almost every single time. 1976 had Logan's Run, one of the earliest well-made futuristic dystopias. Nowadays it feels like yet another crappy young adult about good teenagers versus evil governments, but for that time it was actually not bad and its messages are still powerful to this day. There was also the original Rocky movie. The concept is fine and I love Eye of the Tiger, but it's just a run-of-the-mill underdog flick. It's serviceable, but it's not like it's doing something out of the ordinary. From movies I do recommend, there is a Silent Movie, which is a satire of the whole fuss of making movies where nobody could be heard talking. Taxi Driver is a great psychological drama that shows the effects of war PTSD without the bullshit of the deer hunter. And the best movie of the year, and one of my most favorite in general, is Network. It shows the power of social media, and it's far more relevant now than ever before. It's an outcry of how we are being manipulated and how everything is about the TV ratings. This is what contributed in making me the snob I am today, and I love every second of it, even if it's very preachy at times. 1977 had some really big names in it, such as Close Encounters of the Third Kind, which at the time was seen as a very realistic take on alien abductions. Nowadays it's just basic sci-fi where nothing much happens to say it was worth the watch. Then there is Saturday Night Fever, which was a smash hit for what it was about, although it's mostly the dancing choreography and the Bee Gees music that did the trick. You mostly like it for the aesthetics and not for its basic plot and characters. Same thing with Eraserhead, a complete mindfuck which you will love if you're into that sort of stuff. Me? I was mostly confused with what the hell was going on and what the devil was the ending about. From movies I do recommend, there is Jabberwocky, one of the less famous movies of the Monty Python crew. It has tonal whiplashes, as it flip-flops from dark fantasy to cheesy satire of said dark fantasy, but as a whole it's a worthwhile watch. And the best movie of the year is of course the beginning of the rise of the geek culture. Although the OG Star Wars is not that great of a movie, it brought together all us dorks and made it possible to have all the dorky crap we get nowadays, so I can't hate it for that. It's a fine space adventure and it made it easier for thousands of other works, which I still love to this day, to be greenlit for production because such a thing was now making money. 1978 blessed us with the worst possible follow-up to one of the most successful movies of all times. The fucking Star Wars Holiday Special, which goes for a ridiculously low-budget Christmas flick. This is what George Lucas could produce without someone else doing the editing afterwards and saving the film. Then there is Watership Down, one of the most famous dark fairy tales involving politics and cute animals dying horribly. It's not as focused and memorable as The Plague Dogs or The Animal Farm, but all things considered, it ain't bad if you're not used to dark fairy tales. Then there is The Deer Hunter, which, although has the whole psychological trauma during wartime thing, just like Apocalypse Now, it does it in a very dull way. The first third of the movie is slice of nothing happens, and the last third is people constantly playing Russian roulette. Doing it once or twice would be fine, but holy shit, they were doing it all the time to the point it became a joke. Which is why a movie I do recommend is The Drunken Master, a silly Jackie Chan martial arts flick. It's funny, it's full of energy, and it doesn't overdo it with a single gimmick. If you don't know how to handle heavy topics, then less becomes more. And the best movie of the year is Superman, the OG good superhero movie which proved how you can make something good out of men in spandex. It's childish and silly obviously, but it's also honest, inspiring and very well directed. In TV series, Battlestar Galactica was the first major Star Wars derivative. It began as a thriller by having humanity getting exterminated by robots, and then became a goofy episodic action-adventure about a few humans always outsmarting dumb robots. Then the budget ran out and the next season was mostly taking place on contemporary Earth, making it look cheap and boring, thus it bombed and got cancelled. The show was remade decades later with far better thriller-like atmosphere and much more plot continuity, but the pacing was plain dreadful. It was an idea that simply couldn't be stretched across several seasons. In video games, Space Invaders came out, which, thanks to Star Wars again, it became super popular. People just love the idea of spaceships blowing up shit in space. And so did I. The most memorable things in my childhood are basically this. Lastly, in anime, Future Boy Conan stood out for its very fluent action scenes. It was the go-to anime if you wanted Sakuga for a very long time. Nowadays, nobody cares about it because it's childish and the pretty colors aren't so pretty anymore. The same issue you will keep encountering over and over again. Also in anime, Captain Harlock began airing, which for a very long time was the best anarchist anime, about a pirate who lives free while traveling in space, fighting bad guys and the corrupt world government. And then One Piece came out and completely stole its thunder. But even before that, Harlock had lost its identity because they kept rebooting his past and his accomplishments, so there was no real sense of plot continuity or meaningful character development. Moving to 1979, where the satire of the year is The Life of Brian, which makes fun of the events during the time of Jesus Christ, offending humor at its best. Then we have the two landmarks in science fiction, the very first Star Trek movie, which many didn't like for how slow it is, although that is what was making it so absorbing, and the very first Alien movie, which was so mesmerizing everyone was making clones of it for decades. As for the must-watch titles of the year, there is Apocalypse Now, one of the most famous films about psychological trauma during wartime, and Stalker, a super-duper slow road movie that also happens to be the best natural horror film in cinema history. If you're patient with it and you don't get distracted every 7 seconds, you will be rewarded. In TV series, Buck Rogers came out, the second major Star Wars derivative. It was somewhat like an isekai in the far future, about a guy of today somehow being smarter and more charismatic than everyone else in the future, impressing all the ladies and easily defeating his enemies. And then the budget ran out, the next season looked cheap and boring, thus it bombed and got cancelled. TV series didn't have Netflix budgets back then, and special effects were very expensive. In anime, The Rose of Versailles came out, which for a very long time it was considered the best period drama, as well as the best queer representation. Then the whole hype about period dramas died out and Utena became the next symbol of queer representation. Thus people stopped caring about it. Lastly, the Gundam franchise began in this year and keeps going to this day. Like all things that last too long, they lose their identity and eventually become just a design. As soon as Gundam left the Universal Century timeline, it became whatever. And even the recent ones that are supposed to be in that timeline are just lesbians in high schools instead of a semi-serious sci-fi war drama. And that's why modern sucks. For 1980, there is the first Airplane, the satire of the fad about disaster movies about airplanes that was going on at the time. There is also the second OG Superman movie, which, although not as good as the first for having too much immersion-breaking comedy and weird powers, it's still a million times better than the bullshit Man of Steel. Then there is Flash Gordon, which is essentially an isekai, but it's bloody amazing thanks to the Queen doing the music. It is cheesy and silly, but oh my god, this is how you do an unapologetic empowerment fantasy. Then there is the one we all know of, The Empire Strikes Back, which is the weakest of the original trilogy for being about the philosophy of the Force and a shock effect plot twist at the end. But even so, it's still a million times better than the bullshit of The Last Jedi, which only cared about subverting your expectations. And the best movie of the year is The Shining, a prime example of how to do psychological horror properly. From video games, this is the beginning of the Ultima games, an isekai power fantasy that was groundbreaking at the time and became the blueprint for several RPGs later on. It was eventually mishandled and its last two games were a complete disaster. Also, the first Pac-Man game came out this year and people couldn't stop playing it. It was the first game to cause an addiction and it's still the most recognizable maze chase title of all times. And that's it for the 70s. Only 2 titles made it into my tops. Next up come the glorious 80s.